big news about the Hunter Biden laptop. It may not be new news to you, especially if you've been following Judicial Watch or the New York Post or our friend John Solomon or Miranda Devine, who has a book out about the Hunter Biden laptop and the associated scandals. But finally, the New York Times has deemed to acknowledge, 17 months after it was first reported by the New York Post, that there are these emails that are the subject of Justice Department investigation concerning Hunter Biden and his dealings abroad. And the emails implicate, it looks like to me, and to pretty much anyone else who's looked at this, his father in this, what I would call a RICO scheme, a racketeering operation to use the president's office, or at the time, the vice president's office, to bring in cash to the Biden family machine. Now, the New York Times pretended these emails haven't existed until this report came out just this week. Hunter Biden paid tax bill, but broad federal investigation continues. Now, remember, if you were talking about these emails in October, if you had highlighted this New York Post story, you had Twitter they suspended the account of the New York Post. You had other big tech try to pretend that this story was not valid and censored millions of Americans, including yours truly, who were trying to get the truth out about this. And of course, the big media was trying to poo-poo this investigation, this story. They were trying to protect Joe Biden. And it's not surprising Democrats would try to minimize this. And I don't necessarily blame them for trying to minimize it, but they all knew otherwise. You know, it's one thing to say, well, you know, I don't believe this. It's another thing to say, to know that that what is being alleged is likely true, or you know it to be true, and then lie about it, which is which is exactly what the Biden campaign did, and people like Adam Schiff did. So you had this massive censorship designed to protect Joe Biden's candidacy for the presidency. Now, if that's not election interference, I don't know what is. I mean, that's how you rig an election in plain sight. Don't you agree? And so the New York Times, a day late and a dollar short, has finally admitted these emails exist. This is the key part of the story, at least in terms of that regard. People familiar with the investigation, so the Justice Department has been sitting on this since at least December of 2019. They had the emails back then, or the laptop back then. There was a tax investigation, according to the New York Times report, that began under the Obama administration into what Hunter was up to. And now supposedly it's a criminal investigation, the longest criminal investigation in the history of man. I say that sarcastically, but it's obviously being stretched out, in my view, to protect Joe. People familiar with the investigation said prosecutors had examined emails between Mr. Biden, Mr. Archer. Archer was one of Hunter's business partners and evidently was in business with Joe Biden, and others about Burisma. Where's Burisma in Ukraine? And other foreign business activity. Those emails were obtained by the New York Times from a cache of files that appears to have come from a laptop abandoned by Mr. Biden in a Delaware repair shop. The emails and others in the cache were authenticated by people familiar with them and with the investigation. So if I had read this in October 2020, this video would have been deleted. Twitter would have banned me. YouTube would have prohibited it from being distributed, probably take the video down. Same on Facebook. And I would have been accused by fact checkers, the liberal enforcement squad, of putting out disinformation. So finally, the New York Times admits the truth. And of course, there's a lot of interest in that because they're finally admitting it after Joe Biden wins the election. And the question is, why is it coming out now? And I'm reading a story, and I think it's coming out now because there's this effort to derail any criminal prosecution of Hunter Biden, because I think a criminal prosecution of Hunter Biden necessarily implicates Joe Biden. The investigation, as I said, began as a tax inquiry under the Obama administration. So they've been looking at Hunter forever and a day. And includes possible criminal violations of laws now, tax laws, as well as foreign lobbying and money laundering rules. I would add bribery based on the information that I've seen. Now, what's going on is the Justice Department is thinking of ways. Remember, the Justice Department is controlled by the deep state. And I say that as a shorthand for liberal activists who hate Donald Trump, are largely Democrat in orientation, and don't want to enforce the rule of law against their political allies. That's the Justice Department. Now, does it mean everyone in the Justice Department's like that? Of course not. But that's generally the way the Justice Department operates. Hence this leak. Hence the Justice Department saying that they may have trouble proving Biden intentionally violated the Foreign Agents Registration Act, which requires disclosure to the Justice Department. And so their thinking is that maybe they'll just go for a civil penalty for Biden's failure to follow these foreign agent registration requirements. Who was he a foreign agent for? They're kind of vague on that, aren't they? It's Burisma, it's Ukraine, it's China perhaps. And the outrage is now they're back, according to the New York Times, to suggesting that this foreign agents registration law, which up until the Trump administration had almost always been the subject of civil enforcement only, meaning you had to file the form if you hadn't filed it. And that was the end of it. Maybe you paid a fine or just fixed it that way. But when Trump came to town and Trump was running, they used it to prosecute people criminally. That's what they tried to falsely accuse General Flynn of violating. Yeah, I know. Flynn admitted to criminal violations of law related to FARA, but he withdrew that plea, so he hasn't admitted to anything under the law. They went after Manafort, I think, if I recall correctly, for violating that law criminally. And they hadn't really done any criminal prosecutions under that law until Trump came to town. Now they're going to revert back to the norm to protect Hunter and Joe. But, maybe they'll do something more substantial. And there's another organization or entity tied to Hunter Biden, Blue Star Strategies, that Judicial Watch has highlighted in some of the documents we've uncovered as pushing for Burisma here in the United States, trying to get, I think it was a meeting with, or suggesting they could get a meeting with Hillary Clinton. So there was even a Clinton corruption angle to this Ukraine scandal involving Hunter Biden and Joe Biden. We've got the documents on that. And the other disclosure the Times makes, because a lot of what the Times talks about in the emails have been reported elsewhere. But the news in this story that hasn't been reported elsewhere is that Hunter Biden last year paid off $1 million tax bill. It's not clear where he got the money. I thought he had no money. And the thinking is he paid that off so it would be harder for prosecutors to make the case that he committed a crime in failing, hiding income or failing to file taxes. Now, typically that's not, that doesn't necessarily mean that you won't get prosecuted, but that's the angle they're playing here. And again, to me, it's prepping the battle space to justify not prosecuting Hunter Biden for any criminal activity. The prosecutors, but this is more interesting because this is the money laundering and some of the underlying criminal activity that is tied to the tax issue. Prosecutors had investigated payments and gifts Biden or his associates had received from foreign interests, including a vehicle paid for by using funds from a company associated with a Kazakh oligarch, Kazakhstan, a diamond from a Chicago energy tycoon, and prosecutors also saw documents related to corporate entities through which Mr. Biden and his associates conducted business with interests around the world. And then the story goes into the debate they had about whether this Foreign Agents Registration Act would be something they could prosecute. But the emails that the New York Times has, quote, authenticated, I'm not quite sure how they, quote, authenticated it. I'd be interested to know because it looks to me like Biden's lawyers probably leaked some of this stuff. Did Biden's lawyers authenticate it for him? For the New York Times? And if so, how does that compare with what both Joe Biden and Hunter Biden has said about this laptop, where they've disavowed it largely? So there's an email in April of 2014 where Hunter Biden outlined his vision for working with Burisma, again, this Ukraine company that was Russia-friendly. In the email, Hunter indicated that the forthcoming announcement of a trip to Ukraine by Vice President Biden, who's referred to in the email as my guy, the big guy is in different notes that were released subsequently, should be characterized as part of our advice and thinking, but what he will say and do is out of our hands. So here you have them at least trying to leverage Joe Biden's trip to Ukraine for their business interests. He suggested enlisting a law firm where he worked at the time to help Burisma through direct discussions at State Energy and NSC. So you have Hunter Biden wanting to lobby the Biden White House on behalf of this Ukrainian company. This is what the emails show, according to the New York Times. So, if you've been watching me the last few weeks, I've been talking to you about how this Ukraine scandal that Biden has been in undermines our national security. These emails, further confirmed by the New York Times, highlight this. There's no doubt Biden is implicated here. They've basically confirmed previously reported stories. I think John Solomon first reported the story, that Biden likely attended a meeting while he was vice president with a Burisma official while he was here in Washington, D.C. So I tell you, this is the worst, when I say it's the worst scandal in American history, what I'm saying is that you had President Trump, then candidate Trump, spied on and maligned and smeared by the Obama gang about Russia. You had a Ukraine angle being used against him as well. By the Clinton gang working with the Obama gang, while they knew that Biden was corrupt, literally through his family's dealings in China and elsewhere, and Ukraine and Kazakhstan, for instance, Kazakhstan. And Trump starts asking questions about it once he's president of Ukraine. And what do? They try to impeach him for highlighting the corruption and seeking accountability for what went on there. And we have the Justice Department knowing, at least since 2019, if not sooner, that Hunter Biden was likely engaged in criminal activity. And now we're almost a year and a half into the Biden presidency. There's been a criminal investigation going on in the Justice Department out of the Delaware U.S. Attorney's Office. And supposedly it's a U.S. attorney up there who's been there during Bush and Obama and Trump nominated him. And that's supposed to reassure us that that's going to be an investigation free of conflict of interest. Having the home state prosecutors in Delaware investigate Joe, or Hunter in this regard, I don't buy that. The special counsel regulations of the Justice Department require a special counsel be appointed. I objected to a special counsel being appointed for Joe Biden, for President Trump. Here, his son is being investigated by his Justice Department. That's not a conflict of interest that wouldn't require a special counsel? Of course it does. And the fact that one hasn't been appointed highlights the corruption of the Justice Department, that they have one set of rules. It's not even a different set of rules. They're actually being consistent, which is they only go after their enemies and they protect their friends. I joked on Twitter, you see Jussie Smollett was released from prison this week outrageously. People are complaining about it. And I said, if you think he's getting treated with kid gloves, wait till you see how Hunter Biden and Joe Biden have been treated. There needs to be a special counsel. And in the meantime, Judicial Watch is going to continue its independent investigations. I mean, we highlighted, as I've discussed, how the Burisma had Hillary Clinton's campaign in its sights. We highlighted how the Obama State Department knew that there was a corruption issue for Joe Biden that Russia was taking advantage of and arguably interfering with our foreign affairs. Now, do you think that's gotten worse or better since Biden has become president? I think the war in Ukraine tells you it became worse, because it's long been my view that Putin has Biden's number because of these corruption stories. So the big news is, again, New York Times confirms material about the Hunter Biden laptop that implicates Joe Biden in criminal activity. The Justice Department doesn't evidently want to do much or is afraid to do anything. So they're setting up, a slap on the wrist for Hunter while protecting Joe. And one way, at least to better ensure justice, although it's no guarantee, is to make sure that there's a special counsel appointed that can't be as controlled directly by the deep state Justice Department. Now, again, I don't want to overstate whether that will mean justice will be done, but under this current rubric, it certainly ain't going to get done. And certainly there's enough here to begin an impeachment inquiry of Joe Biden, don't you think? Why not? Trump was impeached for asking questions about Biden's corruption. We have evidence of Biden's corruption, enough to warrant an impeachment inquiry, in the least. You got a lot of people running for office right now this year. Why don't you ask them questions about whether they support impeachment of Joe Biden, or even want to think about it? There's got to be accountability, and Judicial Watch has litigation to try to get accountability here. I mean, we even did simple, basic investigative work, like uncovering that Hunter Biden had Secret Service protection. Actually, we asked the Secret Service for Hunter Biden's travel records, because we knew Secret Service was protecting Hunter while he was Vice President Biden was vice president. That's appropriate. There's nothing illegal about that happening. But it gives you an idea, but because we can ask about where the Secret Service was going, we can figure out where Hunter was going. And he had trips to 29 different countries, including a trip to Russia, including 5 trips to China. And that was only the first 5.5 years of the Obama administrations, because then Hunter ditched the Secret Service and they didn't have any records anymore. All that was uncovered by Judicial Watch. So we're doing this basic legwork that the New York Times refused to do. I mean, there's still nothing in the New York Times about 10% for the big guy. The big guy obviously being Joe Biden, right? So we're going to continue pushing separately and independently. And as the war in Ukraine shows, this corruption has a national security implication beyond measure. I'd be remiss in not mentioning the January 6 hearings this week, which were a sad little affair. The Pelosi Rump Committee, remember, it's a one-party committee. Yes, there are 2 Republicans on the committee, but they don't answer to the Republican minority. They answer to Nancy Pelosi, who is pretending that they're representative of the Republican Party. So there's no majority and minority representation on this committee. So it's a rump committee. And they held a show earlier this week, and they mentioned me. Talk about a sad little committee hearing. They mentioned me. They mentioned Judicial Watch for my alleged email to President Trump or the White House, talking about what he might say on Election Day, given the controversies at the time. And I'm not going to waste my time addressing the committee's attack there. But what I felt was most interesting is they have nothing. I mean, they were trying to tie Trump to the January 6th riot. They were trying to pretend that it was an insurrection, and they still have nothing. In fact, the committee ended with a whimper, with a kind of an additional abuse, in the sense that, they've been in operation for what, a year now plus? And what did they decide to do as they're essentially ending? Because the Congress is essentially gone through the end of, through the election, and then they come back for presumably a lame duck. And if it changes power, as is expected to do, the committee's going to end. So what did they do as the last gasp? They issued a subpoena to Trump. Another wild abuse of power. So it was unlikely he'll testify. He'll probably fight the subpoena based on separation of powers concerns. Now you may hear that phrase separation of powers and not kind of figure out what is meant there. And I'm sure the liberal media doesn't really care about the abuse. But let me explain to you what the issue is. Congress has its prerogatives, and the presidency has its prerogatives under the Constitution. And just like the president just can't haul in members of Congress and start questioning them under oath willy-nilly, the same goes for the President of the United States. And that power presumably extends past his presidency. Because if you can harass former presidents as soon as they get out of office and start questioning about everything they did as president, what good is it to be president if you don't have any prerogatives that remain valid after you leave? So that's going to be obviously a constitutional battle. But what I think is interesting is, because I don't know how it will turn out, because maybe he will be required to testify by the courts. The courts have been anti-Trump on virtually all these constitutional issues, I think wrongly so. So I don't know how it will turn out if push comes to shove in the courts. But if that's the new rule, I think it will be very interesting for Republicans, if they so choose, and I would so choose, to issue a subpoena to Barack Obama. And they can question him about his spying on Trump. They can question him about his IRS abuse. They can question him on his lies about Obamacare. They can question him on Benghazi. They can question him on Fast and Furious. Am I missing any scandals? I'm sure I am. Solyndra, other things like that. What has he been doing recently? All bets are off now. Maybe we can bring in Bill Clinton and question him on his corruption from his presidency. But, that's the abuse of power that is now. Is that the new rule? Is it new rules in the House? You just call in anyone you don't like? Evidently, that's true. And the question for Republicans, if they take over, are they going to punish those who abuse power, or are they just going to exercise the power that's been previously abused and say, well, this is the new rule? Now, the least I would do if I were the Speaker, I would deny the members on that committee any access to any committees in the next Congress. So Benny Thompson, Adam Schiff, Jamie Raskin, Zoe Lofgren, all of whom abused power to target the political enemies of not only the Democratic Party and liberalism generally, but President Biden. They can't be trusted with power again, and they should be denied committee slots. That's the least that can be done. And have ethics investigations in addition to their abuses here, where they were taking information from American citizens and leaking them. I mean, they leaked an email I sent to President Trump. They put it out there. They never asked me about it. And of course, they would never have gotten the email if Joe Biden didn't abuse his authority to turn it over to him. Because typically, presidents, when they get advice from outside or even inside the administration, that advice is privileged. But Biden said, no, none of this is privileged. None of the rules that used to apply to presidents is going to apply to Trump. So as a result, the January 6th committee attacks me and Judicial Watch, and obviously it's all about getting Trump as well. I don't want to overstate it. So, that's what's going on here. I mean, we've got abuse of power, targeting opponents of Biden, evidence in federal court showing Trump was victimized by these agencies that are now still being used to target Trump and supporters of Trump and people who are seen as by Biden's operation as needing to be suppressed. So our republic is under attack, that's for sure. And the rule of law is under attack. And Judicial Watch, per usual, we're not going to back down. You can mention my name all you want. You can mention Judicial Watch's name all you want in sham January 6th committee hearings. And we're not going to back down. I mean, you had, on top of it, you had this video of, for instance, that was released by CNN, coordinated obviously with the January 6th committee, a video created or a film created by Nancy Pelosi's daughter, who is an actual filmmaker, documentary, and she happened to be there on January 6th. And they think the video makes Nancy Pelosi look good when they have her. This is what is a edited video. Can you imagine what the real video looks like? The edited video has Nancy Pelosi talking about wanting to punch out President Trump and how she'd be proud to go to jail over it. Crazy stuff. That's their idea of what makes them look good. Threatening to physically assault the President of the United States and then putting it out there like it's a positive thing. Which raises the question, what other videos are there? Of course, Judicial Watch is in court over January 6 videos by Congress, that Congress has. The 14,000 hours of videos, hundreds of emails about security. So they're hiding all their emails, hiding all their videos, the Pelosi Congress is, while her Pelosi 1-6 rump committee leaks my emails. Judicial Watch's material. Is that in retaliation for our criticizing the committee? Is that in retaliation for our suing them? You can draw your own conclusion. Well, one of the other accountability crises here in Washington, D.C. has to do with our public health agencies, which in my view are just as corrupt as the other so-called deep state agencies we've been concerned about in the past. The National Institutes of Health, Fauci's sub-agency there, the National Institute on Allergy and Infectious Diseases, HHS generally, the CDC. I mean, we've seen during COVID, all of those agencies are terribly corrupt. They have contempt for the common man. They have contempt for political leaders. They have contempt for science. Yet they've been using the powers entrusted to them by the American people to abuse the American people. They've been working with big tech to censor the American people who have objected to their abuses of power and their refusal to use common sense and to really follow the science in their COVID policies and other abuses related to their response to COVID. A lot of it is self-interested in the sense that you have folks like Dr. Fauci and other individuals at NIH who were very much aware that they could be implicated in the breakout of COVID because of their support for gain-of-function research for the lab that has been tied most notoriously potentially to the emergence of COVID, the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Now, Judicial Watch, of course, has taken the lead on exposing this, finding the documents showing that it was gain-of-function research, finding the documents that showed how much money was flowing to these Chinese entities, finding the emails showing that they all knew, Fauci and others, going back years, that it was gain-of-function going on, showing that China was a troublemaker in this regard. And of course, the other problem is they were troublemakers too because they were partners with China. So we can blame China for the emergence of COVID, but to the degree it was a man-made virus, if indeed it was, then our government's partly responsible, namely Dr. Fauci. And one of the other concerns about Fauci and company is the conflicts of interest that were inherent to the way they operate there. You have these billions of dollars in grants, patents, and other activities that take place, royalties and other income that arise from their jobs for working for the government that they get extra money for. So Judicial Watch, with our partners at openthebooks.com, have been taking, again, the lead in trying to figure out what Fauci was making in terms of money, what his job duties and responsibilities were, and what others at the NIH and NIAID were making as they were acting, in our view, in a way that was hopelessly conflicted. I didn't know this until relatively recently. But did you know that Fauci's wife is a top official at NIH? I didn't. Well, now I do. We sued over it because we sued for openthebooks.com for financial records of Dr. Fauci, but also now his wife. So what Judicial Watch did was we filed a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit with openthebooks.com against the Department of Health and Human Services for the employment and financial disclosures of Fauci's spouse, Christine Grady, who is a top Department of Bioethics official there at the National Institutes of Health. Now, again, this is, a simple request for information. These records typically are online. I don't understand why they're not online. But HHS failed to respond to an April FOIA request by openthebooks.com to the NIH asking for the records regarding Grady's employment contracts, modifications, and addendum regarding Christine Grady's regarding her since she was hired as chief of the Department of Bioethics. Any confidentiality agreements, conflicts of interest waivers. I love conflict of interest waivers. You get to waive conflicts of interest. Only in Washington do you get to waive ethics. Ethics disclosures, and of course the financial or economic interest disclosure documents, and her current job description. Why is this a state secret? Why is it that we have to go and sue the federal government for this with a new lawsuit? And what I love about this work is that it's not just Judicial Watch asking the question and having to sue. This shows you the scope of the public interest work by Judicial Watch. We represent others seeking information. OpenTheBooks.com is a great group that specializes in exposing financial records and budgetary records and data about how the government spends their money, or your money, that the government hates having to disclose. And it's basic information, but because it's the amount of money is so outrageous, the government bureaucrats know they're better off keeping it secret. So that's why Open the Books is providing this useful government service or public service. Now, Judicial Watch represents Open the Books. We represent journalists, other interest groups, individual citizens and parents and such in pursuing records on behalf of the American people and obviously on behalf of the clients here. Now, the lawsuit asks the court to require the department to search for and produce all responsive records and order the department to stop withholding non-exempt records related to the FOIA request. So just to be clear, the National Institutes for Health is violating federal law and withholding these records from our client, openthebooks.com. They're violating federal law in covering up the details of the financial records related to the Fauci family, husband and spouse, Dr. Fauci and Christine Grady. Now, we previously had to sue for Fauci financial records for openthebooks.com. We filed a lawsuit in October of 2021 against HHS for these same type of records for Anthony Fauci, as well as royalties paid to NIH employees by outside entities. So as a result of that lawsuit, we helped uncover that over a 10-year period, Fauci and others at NIH received more than $350 million in secretive royalty payments from drug companies and other third parties. Now, we also have another pending lawsuit for Fauci's calendars and his calendar entries. So this is some basic information, again, that we've had to go to federal court. So not only do we have lawsuits again about COVID and the vaccines, which are mega lawsuits that have provided more information and basically everything we know about COVID and its origins and what our government's involvement was in funding the research that has been potentially tied to it. We've had to do this basic FOIA litigation for how much these people are getting paid, right? And basic financial disclosures of government employees. Now, you may recall last week we talked about how we uncovered how the FBI was investigating the Fauci agency grant to the Wuhan that involved gain-of-function research, further calling into question the honesty and whether Fauci testified truthfully to Congress. And I don't think it's any coincidence that after those types of disclosures, Fauci is telling the media that he plans to retire at the end of the Biden administration. Further, in my view, confirming he is a political operative as opposed to an apolitical government employee. Why would he tie his retirement to the end of a presidential term other than by frankly confirming that he's there for political reasons and not scientific reasons, as he constantly, and in my view, falsely asserts. Now, our client, Andrew Vesky, who is CEO and founder of Open the Book, said, once again, NIH is using taxpayer dollars to avoid transparency and leaving us no choice but to enter litigation that will also, again, burden the taxpayer. So, the government's happy to allow this litigation to go on because they don't pay for it. No one goes to jail for violating FOIA law, although technically I don't know if that would be possible. I don't think the courts here in D.C., which is basically a government-centric court system, would push that hard. It's time for NIH to stop routinely hiding information as simple as a job description and embrace basic transparency. And we thank our friends at Judicial Watch for helping us get the answers we deserve. And of course, we're happy to do the work. And so when you contribute to Judicial Watch, you're helping these other organizations too, you should know. And as I note, we have good reason to believe that these financial disclosure records will give Americans a more complete picture of the conflicts of interest that have compromised NIH and, frankly, Dr. Fauci. That our client had to file a federal lawsuit to gain access to this basic information speaks volumes. So there you have it, folks. Again, Judicial Watch is the tip of the spear in trying to figure out what Anthony Fauci has been doing at NIH. And again, it's a family affair when it comes to the Faucis. And so that's why we're investigating another top government official, his spouse, Christine Grady. So I think we have another lawsuit we just filed on Christine Grady. I think I'll talk about that next week. So it's not just, it's Judicial Watch doesn't play games. When we go and figure out there's something going on, we ask numerous questions and demand numerous answers, and where possible, if we're not getting the answers we are due under law, we go to court. And it's not just one lawsuit. We'll sue once, twice, 3, 4, 5, as many as it takes within reason to try to get the truth. And I don't know about you, but I think what went on with COVID and who's responsible for it, the destruction of our economy, the craziness around the abuses related to vaccine mandates and other public health mandates that have been so controversial, the arrogance of Dr. Fauci in pretending he wasn't doing something in terms of funding gain-of-function research when in fact he was, those are pretty important issues. And the big media has zero interest in it. Congress is basically hapless in figuring out what went on. And so it's up to Judicial Watch to come to the rescue here and figure out the truth about this major, worldwide, in my view, worldwide scandal. The big news this week, at least for those of us who care about the rule of law in our Constitution, is the disclosure that happened last week. I guess it was late Friday or in the afternoon, whenever it happened. Special Counsel John Durham filed a brief. And it was a brief where he was fighting the lawyers for Mr. Sussman, the Clinton campaign lawyer who was indicted for making a false statement. And there's a conflict of interest fight. He says that the lawyers, or at least one of the lawyers, is conflicted. And he's got to pull, and so he's filing the brief to make the case. Now, in the brief, he had some really shocking information that he shared with the court. And I'm going to read it to you because other than Fox News and other conservative media outlets, the big media is lying about what Durham said, misstating what Durham said, pretending or characterizing it without quoting it. So I think it's important that I show it to you, or at least read it to you. And here's the document here. You can verify I'm reading from the court document. United States District Court for the District of Columbia, United States of America versus Michael A. Sussman. Now, the factual background is where this information I'm talking about is laid out. Now, the defendant is charged with a one-count indictment with making a materially false statement to the FBI less than 2 months before the 2016 U.S. presidential election. The defendant, a lawyer at a large international law firm, quote, Law Firm 1, which is Perkins Coie, that was then serving as counsel to the Clinton campaign, met with the FBI general counsel at the FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., and this took place in September of 2016. The defendant provided the FBI general counsel with purported data and, quote, white papers, unquote, that allegedly demonstrated a covert communication channel between the Trump organization and a Russia-based bank, Russian Bank 1. So that's the Alpha Bank that has been referenced. The indictment alleges that the defendant lied in the meeting, falsely stating to the general counsel that he was not providing the allegations to the FBI on behalf of any client. In fact, the defendant, Hillary's lawyer, had assembled and conveyed the allegations to the FBI on behalf of at least 2 specific clients, including one, a technology executive, Tech Executive 1, and a U.S.-based internet company 1, and the Clinton campaign. The defendant's billing records reflect that the defendant repeatedly billed the Clinton campaign for his work on the Russia bank allegation. In compiling and disseminating these allegations, the defendant and Tech Executive 1 also had met and communicated with another law partner at the Law Firm 1, who was then serving as general counsel to the Clinton campaign lawyer 1. And that supposedly is Mark Elias, who is the leading Democratic Party lawyer in the country. The indictment also alleges that beginning in approximately July 2016, Tech Executive 1, who's alleged to be Rodney Jaffe, had worked with the defendant, a U.S. investigative firm retained by Law Firm 1, on behalf of the Clinton campaign, numerous cyber researchers and employees at multiple internet companies to assemble the purported data and white papers. In connection with these efforts, Tech Executive 1, this is key, exploited his access to non-public and or proprietary internet data. Tech Executive 1 also enlisted the assistance of researchers at a U.S.-based university who was receiving and analyzing large amounts of internet data in connection with a pending federal government cybersecurity research contract. And I'm going to have more on that later. Tech Executive 1 tasked these researchers to mine internet data to establish an inference, and that's in quote, and a, quote, narrative, that's again in quotes, tying then-candidate Trump to Russia. In doing so, Tech Executive 1 indicated that he was seeking to please certain VIPs, referring to individuals at Law Firm 1 and the Clinton campaign. The government's evidence at trial will also establish that among the internet data Tech Executive 1 and his associates exploited was domain name system, DNS, internet traffic pertaining to 1, a particular healthcare provider, 2, Trump Tower, 3, Donald Trump's Central Park West apartment building, and 4, the executive office of the President of the United States. Tech Executive 1's employer, Internet Company 1, had come to access and maintain dedicated servers for the EOP as part of a sensitive arrangement whereby it provided DNS resolution services to the EOP. Tech Executive 1 and his associates exploited this arrangement by mining the EOP's DNS traffic and other data for the purpose of gathering derogatory information about Donald Trump. Now, when they talk about DNS data and resolution data, what they're referring to, and I don't pretend to be an internet computer expert, and I'm sure my colleagues here will correct me if I'm completely wrong here, is that DNS data essentially is your computer systems, your computers, your internet systems all have numbers assigned to them more or less. And the way you talk to other computers on the internet and the way other internet computers are able to allow others to talk to them, ranging from Facebook to Twitter to any shopping sites, is that you exchange numbers. You say, I need to go to Amazon. And they don't look for the word Amazon. They look for a series of numbers. And those are the DNS numbers. And when you go to Amazon, Amazon sees, oh, I have a computer here with DNS number at 8 or 9 digits typically, if I recall correctly. So that's what they were looking at. They were looking at where the EOP and Trump's personal computers were, where they were going. And if you have the DNS numbers, you can figure out what sites they were going. So if you have a computer's DNS number, typically, especially for big sites, you can reverse engineer the actual site name. So the numbers it's like having the telephone number and doing a reverse number lookup. So furthermore, the indictment further details that on February 9th, 2017, so this is after Trump had been sworn in as President of the United States. He was sworn in January. The defendant provided an updated set of allegations, including the Russian Bank 1 data and additional allegations relating to Trump to a second agency of the U.S. government, Agency 2, and that's widely understood to be the CIA. The government's evidence at trial will establish that these additional allegations relied in part on the purported DNS traffic that Tech Executive 1 and others had assembled pertaining to Trump Tower, Donald Trump's New York City apartment building, and the EOP, and the aforementioned healthcare provider. In his meeting with Agency 2, the defendant again is Michael Sussman, Hillary Clinton's campaign lawyer. The defendant provided data which he claimed reflected purportedly suspicious DNS lookups by these entities of Internet Protocol IP addresses affiliated with a Russian mobile phone provider. The defendant further claimed that these lookups demonstrated that Trump and/or his associates were using supposedly rare Russian-made wireless phones in the vicinity of the White House and other locations. The special counsel's office has identified no support for these allegations. So there you have it. Now, what do you hear when I read you that? And you can look at the document. It's widely available online. So what you see here is that they were spying on the Trump White House. Now, the left pretends that's not what the document says because they only reference EOP. But why would they be looking at EOP data related to Trump during the Obama administration? So what do you see here? Here you have Durham, I think quite explicitly alleging that they were spying on the Trump White House, this Clinton spy ring, as I call it. It's not clear who was paying for it at the time. There are some details that need to be ferreted out. But for the first meeting in September, he was working for the Clinton campaign. The left would have us believe that he stopped working for the Clinton campaign when he had the second meeting with the CIA in February of 2017. And the left would have us believe that when Durham says that they were spying on the executive office of the president, he meant the Obama White House, which makes no sense given the document's reliance or presentation of evidence that the EOP data related to Trump's and other use, Trump phones associated with Russia. Why would they be examining the Obama White House for Trump phones activity? Doesn't make any sense. Obviously, it was the Trump White House that was being spied upon. So what has happened since this has been released is a firestorm. Fox News put out a big report that I think correctly characterized it. What happened immediately? The left leapt to the defense of Hillary Clinton and started to censor and suppress the information. Facebook, for instance, has censored the Fox News story that broke wide open this filing, the most prominent story on it. I posted it on Judicial Watch's Facebook page, and Facebook has vandalized it with a fake fact check warning sign or warning label that it contains false information or something like that. And it leads to a fact check that doesn't even quote this document. So Facebook is engaged in the mass suppression of millions of Americans' right to gain access to that information, specifically a Fox News story on it. And it's not just Judicial Watch that's being censored and suppressed. Senator Charles Grassley, the Republican senator from Iowa, they did the same to his Facebook postings. If you've posted that Fox News story, go check to see how Facebook is labeling it now. So if you think it was just about Hunter Biden that they were willing to suppress information on, no. They need to protect Hillary too. Now, Hillary Clinton has pretended this is all conspiracy theories and lies. She hasn't said what's the lie about it. This man's been indicted by Durham. Is that a lie? This man's been indicted for lying about his representation of the Clinton campaign and communications with the FBI. Is that a lie? What was the nature of the Clinton campaign's spying effort on Donald Trump? We see what the evidence suggested, what Durham suggested it was. They were spying on him in his home, in his office, and in the Trump White House. And think of the national security implications of any executive office of the president. That data being manipulated and misused for political purposes. The EOP is supposed to be secure. Well, they had these shady contractors in there, it looks like, that were misusing this data, misusing their contract. So what's interesting about this Durham filing, besides the defensive reaction of the Hillary media, is that it highlights the additional crimes that could be at play here for those involved in the misuse of this government contract and the misuse of government data for these illicit purposes. Who knew what and when? And it's further reason for Hillary Clinton to be questioned under oath. So this is a big deal. I mean, and on top of it, people say how outraged they are about it. I don't know what's worse, Hillary spying on Trump or the FBI spying on Trump. What do you think is worse? I kind of think the FBI spying on Trump is worse and working with Hillary to do it. Because I don't see any evidence that anyone blew the whistle on this fake information. They went to the CIA with information suggesting that they had been monitoring the executive office of the president, of Donald Trump. Even if it wasn't Donald Trump, let's say it was Barack Obama. Why would the CIA think that was appropriate? And why wouldn't they turn them in immediately? The other frustrating thing about this is that Durham has taken 3 years to get this out to us. If this material had been released, I think, prior to the 2020 election, I think the election outcome could have been different. Don't you? And of course, Judicial Watch has taken the lead over the years in exposing Russiagate. It's good to see Durham is doing his own independent investigation. These are serious indictments more recently of Sussman and the Fusion GPS Russian national who helped write the fake dossier for the Clinton gang. But now we know the Clinton gang had special access through government contractors to private government data, your data, that they weren't allowed to use for the purposes they used it for. Now, of course, they're going to say otherwise, right? But of course, what are they going to say? They're not going to confess to the media. They're going to say they had the right to use this data. They were investigating Trump and Trump is bad. We'll see if a jury buys it. And I hope information like this isn't just like being used to help them win a conflict of interest battle with lawyers for Sussman. I hope information like this is the beginning or suggests that there will be more indictments. Because if all of this is the beginning, however long it's taken, I guess, better late than never. But if it's the end, that would be outrageous. I want to repeat again, this is what our goal should be. Our goal should be to encourage people to vote in person on election day. We should not have mass mail-in balloting. We should not have early voting that goes on for weeks and weeks beforehand. And we should demand that systems are in place to ensure that ballots are counted on election day, not for days and weeks and months afterwards. And of course, anyone who votes should be required to show a secure photo ID. And certainly anyone who's registered to vote and or who votes should also be confirmed to be a United States citizen. What's so hard about this? You know what's so hard about it? That policy, those basic election integrity measures, are opposed by the left. Why do I think they oppose it? Because it makes it harder to steal elections. And they want to be able to steal elections when possible. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.